The Healer is one of the 10 original troops that were in Clash of Clans when it was very first released to the world. She is a strong support troop at the mid-tier town halls like Town Hall 7 and Town Hall 8, where she is great at helping keep alive giants for much longer. Then once moved on to Town Hall 9 and above, she is most known for her role that she plays in Queen Walk attacks, where they stick to her like glue and do their best to ensure that she doesn't die. The Healer is likely the most unique troop in all of Clash of Clans, as she is the only support troop in the village. She does no damage, and by herself she is useless. However, add her to most armies, and she can change the entire outcome of the battle. Being a support troop, she is often forgotten or not given enough credit, but in today's story, we are going to give her the spotlight, and I'll tell you my version of how the Healer came into the world of Clash. A very long time ago, back at the very beginning of Clash of Clans in 2012, all of the villagers were getting ready and preparing the village in anticipation for the grand opening of their village. It was a few days before the release date of August 2nd, 2012, and Clash of Clans was going to open their doors to the entire world. So the builders were finishing the last of their buildings, the troops were getting their armor and weapons ready, and the villagers were making sure everything was running in tip-top shape. The next few days were a bit hectic as everyone was anxious to begin battling against other villages, and once the day finally came, everyone in the village went nuts, especially the barbarians. They literally could not wait to get into battle. Anyway, the barbarians and the rest of the troops left the village to go and attack their very first base ever. And while they went to go search for their first base, another village's army spotted their village and began closing in on it. As they prepared to attack the village, all of the builders and villagers ran into their builder huts or the town hall to save themselves. But for some reason, one single villager stopped outside of the town hall rather than going in. The rest of the villagers urged her to join them inside, but the villager refused. She told them that they would destroy our town hall with all of you guys inside. You'll all die. Now, of course this wasn't true, however, at the time, the villagers did not know this, and Aurora, the name of the villager who refused to go inside, stood outside the town hall as the doors were closed and locked shut. She turned around to face the oncoming army. She picked up a weapon off of the barracks weapon rack, and then the army quickly made work of the village, and after they finished off all of the village's last defenses, they approached the town hall. Aurora stood in front, guarding the town hall, quite pathetically might I add, and then the troops stopped before attacking, and humorously looked at Aurora, an unskilled and pathetic last defense to the town hall. Then nervously, Aurora yelled at the army, "Stop, or face my wrath." Then she started doing a bunch of practice kicks and tried her best to intimidate them with her combat skills. Obviously, none of this stunted the army for even a second. However, they did watch and laugh at the pathetic villager who was attempting to stop an entire army all by herself. After getting a really good laugh out of it, the army had finally had enough and decided it was time to just end it, since time was running out of the battle anyways. The army quickly marched forward and effortlessly took out Aurora. Unfortunately, unlike the rest of the troops in the village, villagers could actually be killed and were not able to be brought back to life through the barracks. And the rest of the villagers saw this from inside the town hall. They all screamed out, "No!" and couldn't believe she just sacrificed herself to protect all of them. And without having much time to dread on the death of their friend, the army continued to close in on the town hall. The rest of the villagers sadly accepted their fate. However, right before the army could make it to the town hall, they just turned around, and it turns out that the time limit for the battle had run out, and Aurora's attempt at intimidating them had distracted them long enough to save them from all being killed. So the rest of the villagers came running out and decided that they needed to have the most respectful and significant funeral ever for Aurora, who had sacrificed herself to save everyone else. So before the village's army had come back, the villagers and builders had dug a small grave and buried Aurora. They then said a few words about her bravery and how they will always respect and remember what she did for them. Then shortly after the funeral had ended, the village's army had returned home from their battles. They were all in very high spirits as they had just won the majority of their battles. However, once they got closer to all of the villagers and builders who were all gathered around, they sensed a bit of sad and depressing vibes. So the wizard asked what was going on. One of the villagers told the wizard how Aurora had sacrificed herself to save everyone else, and now they had buried her in respect for what she did. The wizard looked at them and told them, you guys do know that even if they do destroy the town hall, you guys are all safe, right? I put a special spell on the basement of the town hall so that you guys will all be safe no matter what happens to the town hall. All of the villagers and builders looked around anxiously at each other, thinking it sure would have been nice to know this beforehand. So now it turned out that Aurora's sacrifice had been in vain. However, at the time, Aurora, like all the others, believed that they were not safe, and yet she still willingly sacrificed herself. All of the other troops would forever remember Aurora for her selfless act in sacrificing herself with the thought of saving everyone else. And then the next day, a bunch of trees that had never been there before had sprouted up in the middle of the Clash of Clans village. The troops all saw this as a small sign, that these trees had grown due to Aurora, who had been buried and a part of the ground. So all of the villagers thought that Aurora's spirit had spread to the ground and sprouted a bunch of plants, and every time a new tree or something would sprout, or any time they would walk by a tree, they would stand there and applaud the tree or Aurora's spirit as a small way to say thank you for her sacrifice. And that's why you can still see, to this day, villagers going around randomly clapping at trees. The passing of Aurora caused a tough time for all of the troops in the village. They were all extremely distraught and upset that one of the most selfless troops in the entire village was now gone forever. It was terribly sad, but unfortunately there was no good way of bringing her back. Not to mention, back at the beginning of Clash there was no witch, so resurrecting Aurora wasn't even an option. The troops in the village felt extremely sad and helpless as there was nothing that they could do, except pray for Aurora. So all of the troops prayed and wished for Aurora to be brought back, but nothing worked. Then one day, the wizard mentioned how whenever he had to make spells, he had to sacrifice or get rid of something into the spell to make it work. And he suggested that maybe it worked in a similar way for praying to the leprechous gods, where they would have to make some sacrifices. All of the troops thought that the wizard's logic made sense, so they all began gathering some items and such to sacrifice. Some of the troops decided to grab a large boulder that was in the middle of the base and added that to the altar where they set on fire and destroyed the items. The rock didn't burn until they got 10 dragons to simultaneously breathe fire onto it at the same time. And after the rock was successfully sacrificed, the wizard came by and told the troops, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that the more powerful the items you sacrifice, the more likely the gods will be able to hear you. So sacrificing a rock probably won't help too much." But it was too late, the rock was already gone. And that is actually the reason as to why that particular rock is no longer in the game anymore. So the troops regrouped and decided to try sacrificing some other stuff. For example, the wizards gave away their spellbook that would have allowed them to cast spells other than just a fireball. The giant sacrificed his little cannon that he used to hold beside him. Even the goblins gave away all of their stashes of gold. That was just how badly everyone wanted Aurora to be given a second chance at life. They all brought their sacrifices to the altar by the campfire that was closest to the water, and then they began burning all of their sacrifices. They then ushered a little prayer under their breath, asking the leprechous gods to bring Aurora back to life. Thankfully, it was a quieter day, and the leprechous gods were able to hear their prayer. Unfortunately though, they couldn't simply just bring Aurora back to life, otherwise the villagers would expect this anytime any important troop died. And so rather than just snapping their fingers and poofing Aurora back into the village as if nothing had ever happened, instead they decided that they would have to resurrect her, but not as her old self, but rather as something new, something that represented exactly what she stood for, and something that the rest of the troops could look up to her for. So when the leprechous gods resurrected her, they turned her into an angel, to represent how selfless and caring she was. And to top off the angel look, they gave her 2 angelic wings so that she could fly around freely. But the biggest part that they added for her was a special power, where they gave her a special healing power so that she was selfless and always trying to protect and help others, like when she sacrificed herself for the rest of the villagers. So shortly after all of the troops finished their sacrifices, they all looked to the sky in anticipation for the leprechous gods to grant their wish. So they sat there and waited, but for a little while nothing happened. They were just staring at a blank sky. But then finally, after the leprechous gods were finally done resurrecting Aurora, she came floating down from the sky in front of all the awaiting troops. Aurora greeted the rest of the troops as they all stood there with their mouths hung open, not believing that this actually worked. Aurora was welcomed back into the Clash of Clans village with open arms and was almost praised as a hero. And no more was she just a regular old villager. After showing her bravery in battle, the village chief asked her if she would like to join the army, but not to fight, but instead to use her new healing powers to help keep her fellow troops alive. Aurora agreed to help. She figured now that she has all these amazing abilities, she may as well use them for the good of the army. So she ended up joining the army, where she would shoot her magical beams of healing towards her friendly troops. She was obviously beloved by all and everyone's favorite to have in the army camp with them. And then not only was she loved in attacks, but she was also helpful back at the village, where she would use her abilities to help the wizard make some heal spells, so that when she wasn't able to be in the attack with the army, they would still be able to use some of her healing abilities. And not only did she help the wizard make heal spells, but also she acted as the village doctor, where she would treat all of the troops' injuries, big or small, whenever they needed them. And things went on like this for a very long time, where the healer was the backbone of many attacks, whether it be keeping big groups of troops alive or keeping the most valuable hero, the Archer Queen, alive during battles. And that there is the story on how the healer was brought into the world of Clash. Who would have thought that by adding a harmless healer into the chaotic Clash Royale arena that she would tear it up and start wrecking opponents? To build off my most recent healer origin stories, here is the brand new Battle Healer's origin story. many years, the healer has been beloved by her village and fellow troops. I mean, who wouldn't like her? All she would do is help keep them alive during battles and help heal them up after battles. Being the only healer in the village, she always had a lot of work to do, but normally she didn't mind, because she was just that type of person who loved to help out others. But sometime recently, things in the village really started to pick up. Her army must have been getting a lot worse lately because she had to do almost twice as much healing as usual. And so she was very overworked and was getting very tired. She was so exhausted that she began doing a not so great job of healing other troops. She was so bad that she accidentally turned some troops into trees and random buildings. And seeing as the healer was having a hard time, the wizard decided to brew up some heal spells and start helping out. This gave the healer a bit of a break. However, while the troops were using the heal spells instead of the healer, the troops started to like using the spells a lot more than waiting in the super long lines to see the healer after every battle. This potion just went down easier and was way more convenient for them, and so they decided to like that better. They liked the wizard's healing potion so much more, and the village chief even started using her less in battles because the heal spells were just better, and then they saved more space in the army camps. Not to mention, the village chief also started using her less in battles since he began thinking that the healer was just too fragile to be used in battle. The healer felt betrayed, because she had spent literally all of her time healing up the other troops, and as soon as they finally found some alternative to her, they just completely abandoned her like that. As if everything she's done for them meant nothing. She felt like none of them even liked her, and were literally just using her for her healing abilities. There were still, however, some troops who continued to use her abilities and were genuinely thankful for her. So for that reason, she still stuck around the village for many years after. However, during one special event, the Ice Wizard came to visit the Clash of Clans village for a little bit. During that time, he spent a lot of time with the healer, because he was being used a lot in battles and obviously getting injured during them. And so he would see the healer to heal his wounds after battles. The healer got to talk a lot with the Ice Wizard, and he would tell her all these stories about what it was like at the Clash Royale arenas. They ended up spending so much time together that they became really good friends. And once the Ice Wizard's time was done at the Clash of Clans village, he invited the healer back to the Clash Royale arena with him to see what it was all about. And since the healer didn't have much to do at the village, she decided to go along. And since the Ice Wizard was a legendary card, the king especially liked him and even offered to let the healer try out a single battle. The healer was really excited to finally get back into some battles, so the king gave her a set of princess armor to help protect her out there, and then she headed out onto the battlefield with no weapon. But as soon as she got out there, she started doing what healers do best: healing. At first it wasn't bad because she was healing her own team's troops, but as the battle progressed, she started to heal the enemy's troops too. The king was watching all of this unfold and couldn't believe what he was seeing. The healer just stood there on her side of the bridge, healing the enemy troops as they came in and attacked the king's tower. And thanks to the help of the healer, she helped keep the enemy troops alive just long enough for them to take out the king's tower. After watching this unfold, the king was absolutely furious. He went up to the healer and started to tear her apart and almost verbally assault her. He was yelling in her face, saying things like, "You're useless, you don't deserve to be here, and you will never be a troop in this arena." After hearing all of this from the king, the healer felt a mixture of emotions, ranging from upset and sad all the way to furious and raging with anger. In fact, she was so mad that the next battle, she stormed out onto the battlefield, picked up a sword from a fallen knight, and started to float towards the king that just said all those mean things to her. As she got closer, he kept shooting her with his cannon, but as she was floating closer, she began to self-heal. Turns out some troops, when they get mad, they just turn purple and start to rage, and attack quicker and faster and harder. But the healer was a special case, because when she got mad, she would start to radiate some healing energy, instead of rage with anger. Not only would she heal herself, but as soon as she took a swing at the king's tower, a wave of healing washed over herself and any troops near her. And this repeated every swing she took, where the anger would overwhelm her and the healing would just come out whenever she took a swing. That being said, she didn't do a whole lot of damage to the king's tower when she did attack, for the obvious reason that she never used a sword before and was quite weak. But thanks to her healing, she was able to stay there and attack the king's tower for long enough that she took it all down, all by herself. After taking out the king's tower, the king quickly apologized and said that he was wrong and he would be honored to have her on her team, if she could just do that special healing stuff all the time. And so during the next few days, the healer accepted and she trained herself to get herself to the point where she was raging with anger again, so that she could repeat the healing effects that she just did. And after a decent amount of practice, she was able to cue the healing effect on command, where whenever she wasn't attacking, she would just focus and start to self-heal. And she would still be able to release that heal effect whenever she attacked, as it would just overwhelm her and then spread out in a circle around her. And ever since then, she has been absolutely killing it in the arena, and beloved by all troops, might I add, who just hide themselves behind her as she soaks up all the damage and heals them in the process. I mean, what more could you ask for from a troop? And anyways, that there is the story of how the battle healer came into the world of Clash.